So when everything folds together in harmony, that's when there's propulsion. So in other words, if you raise your domain authority, but the website itself is technically not sound, you're working against yourself. If the site is technically sound, you put a lot of time into that, but your domain authority is faltering and it's just low. There's not a lot of trust coming through to you. It's going to hinder you. It's when everything works together in concert.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang, man, we're going to have a great discussion today because we're going to cut through a lot of bunk and myths and, quite frankly, help you to not make a mistake that so many people are making, because we're going to talk about the 3 questions about SEO that you should never ask, because we have Jon Lightfoot on the show with us. Jon, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, okay, Jon, but before we get into that and about those 3 questions about SEO we should never ask, can you give our listeners just a little bit about your background and the value you bring today?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I've been an SEO for, frankly, almost 18 years now. So it's been a passion of mine. And I've worked over a decade, brand side over a decade, agency side, touched a lot of verticals and industries, but always have had just this sincere passion for SEO. And in the last couple of years, I started Strategic SEO Solutions, where SEO is all we do, eat, breathe, sleep. It's all SEO for us.
Well, and as you say that to me, I mean, for me, I even think about just, if you think about SEO from a continuum or a maturity level perspective, and, it used to be many years ago, we could say that, well, it's our, digital marketing guy or a web guy or lady or whatever that's doing those things. But really, what has come to the complexity is, like, if you think about digital marketing, there's really about 7 really deep domain areas of expertise that people possess. And really, nobody does that anymore. Nobody can possess that type of domain expertise.
True. Yeah. I personally liken it to kind of that notion around, and this could just be a West Coast notion, I don't know. But if we think about, we're hungry, right? We want to go to the restaurant, and maybe there's a restaurant, that serves cheeseburgers, right? But they also have, tacos and spaghetti and everything else. And so kind of that notion around, master of all, of some, not master of all, whatever the kind of analogy is. But the point is then you go to these burger chains and that's all they do. And usually it's pretty spot on. I mean, it's and that's for burgers. When we think about the digital realm, when we think about technology and to your point, all of these, elements that fold into the greater ecosystem of marketing, it gets deeply complex. And more than that, it's always evolving. So it would be difficult to be a master of each and every one of those verticals. And that's why I think that's really the catalyst behind what we're doing, which is just being very, very deep. I mean, SEO, to your point, it's in a perpetual state of evolution. The algos are always changing. We're always on our toes. And you want to be, you have to be, in order to be abreast of what's new. Yeah.
Well, and because of that complexity, and we keep saying this, I keep saying it was with these different interviews and in my day-to-day work, is that, COVID created such a magnitude of change and such an increase in complexities that there is no going back. And so we have to really understand these disciplines and domains require deep domain expertise. And I think that leads us into, if I'm not quite so sure of it, I would therefore, based on what I know, I'm going to ask certain questions, and they become our frequently asked questions, which ironically enough become one of the targets that we have for organic SEO. But in your space, when you start talking about the 3 questions that you're often seeing about SEO that we should never be asking, run us through those.
Sure. Thank you. And it's true. I mean, there's a lot of questions, as you can imagine, about SEO constantly, but there are some core veins that you hear consistently, that I hear consistently. And yes, I think there are 3 that are just very, very common that have purpose, but with this slight slant can be very impactful. So kind of that notion that, of course, you speak to, which is this FAQ, SAQ. And so on that side of the fence, one of the questions that I hear very, very, very often is this notion around how do I get more organic search traffic to the site, right? If I do SEO, what is my KPI? What are one of my KPIs? More traffic to the site. That makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that obviously if you're leveraging search engine optimization and you want more impression share with an organic search, a clean KPI could be more traffic to the site. So I'm often asked, how do I get more traffic with organic search? Like, and how much traffic? What are the numbers? What are the numbers? And I think that is the question. But the question maybe that I feel they should be asking is more about how do I get the right traffic to my site? Not just traffic. And I think so often, especially as we kind of report up, right? Maybe we're going to the C-level or wherever we're heading with our metrics. It's this notion of, are we up month over month? And how much are we up month over month? How many new sessions, right? And that backs into the question, like, how much traffic can I get from SEO? Yes, you can and will increase your traffic from SEO. But I think the real question we really should be looking at more robustly and intimately is how do I get the right type of traffic? And so this starts to back into the queries, for example. A lot of times, these queries start off with metrics that revolve around how many searches per month, how much search volume. We want to target high search volume queries. Nothing wrong with that per se. However, that starts to back in how broad are those queries? Are we really, especially in the B2B space, especially there, are we really bringing the right people to the site under those queries? And so the traffic isn't just about increasing sessions, because if it isn't the right quality traffic, this is where SEO begins to atrophy and deteriorate, because now your bounce rate will start to increase, right? Your time on site will start to mitigate. And when those types of things happen, you're actually working against yourself. So this isn't necessarily a quantitative notion. It's more of a qualitative. And so that holds true even when we're talking about how to obtain more organic traffic.
Well, that's a very good one. So, I mean, as you're talking about that, again, that's gets down into what I know and understand about it. And quite frankly, those people who are responsible, for that, how they're conveying their value and worth and their impact to the business. Absolutely. And in fact, that's the other part of it I was thinking about too, which is that beyond the query, meaning maybe getting a little bit more dialed in, extrapolating out the query so it's a bit more long tail and very precise, right? Beyond that, it's the notion of intent. In other words, does the query back into a pain point? Does it solve anything? Does it also fold into value propositioning? Does it also tie back into the page that has a soft landing for the user so that it's talking about thematically and contextually supporting that initial query? So when we go broad with our queries, there is more volume, but we start to it starts to become more ambiguous around the notion of, are we targeting the right people? And even if they are they being directed to the right pages? So I think beyond this element of increasing traffic, which we do, we should, we will, it also has to be deeper than that of how do we really do that in a way that targets the right people, the right demo. Okay, so let's go on to our number two. Okay, number two. This is a big one because I think it's on everybody's mind, or it is, or it should be, will be in 2022. And it surrounds domain authority. There's a lot of chatter about DA. You hear everybody talk about how do I increase my DA, or maybe they're talking about the DR, depending on the different metrics or tools. The DA comes out of Moz, domain authority. The DR is the domain rating coming out of Ahrefs. At the end of the day, it's authority, right? How do we increase domain authority? It's a great question. It has to happen if we want to compete, if we want to outrank. We have to increase our DA. That has to be mindful. But the right question is, how do I increase my domain authority sustainably and safely? Those caveats are real. I spend a large part of my day giving analysis to just a plethora of different domains, and for a variety of reasons. And
I can't tell you how many times I see websites that have only been around for 60 days, 90 days, and they have a DA, domain authority, of 50, 58, 62. It's really impressive, right? It goes up to 100, but anytime you kind of pass that 50, 60 level, you're in the upper echelons. And so you see that. It's artificially inflated. And so you have to look at this. It's more than just anybody can artificially inflate their DA. It has to go beyond that. And if you don't go beyond that, it isn't sustainable. In fact, it can be toxic. And that could definitively hinder the performance of the brand and of organic search. And so beyond just saying, tying a metric, I want our DA to go from 27 to 50 in the next 6 months, right? That idea is prudent in the notion of let's expand and increase our DA, our domain authority. But the real question to ask is, how will we do it sustainably so that it lives on for a duration of time and safely, so that we don't end up having penalization and truncation within search because Google penalizes us for not being within their algorithmic compliance of Penguin. And so that's where you have to get really deep. Domain authority is like an onion, and it needs to be peeled back far deeper and with far more layers than just this high level DA. You don't want to get starstruck by the DA. And so you have to look at far more robust metrics than just that.
Okay. So as you started talking about that, I started thinking all these tactics that people use in order to be able to boost that, linking strategies. And it just goes on and on and on and on. And you talk about, degradation, you talk about essentially shooting yourself in the foot. What are some of the things that you see people doing that are common that you're shooting yourself in the foot and you don't even know it?
Yeah. Well, part of it really is that they're targeting the DA, meaning that they're saying, okay, look, I need to get a link. We need some backlinks. Okay. And when we go to get the backlinks, I want them coming from DA 50s. People ask me all day long, can you give me some DA 60s? Can your teams pick up some DA 70s? That idea is in a good place, right? Having this trust flow, this strength coming back to you. Sure. But the problem is what does their PA look like? Their page authority, right? What does their spam score look like? So often, when I have these discussions, when we look at this, nobody's even thinking about that. And yet so many of the algos fold back into the spam score. What does the PQ, which is kind of this percentage of quality backlinks that are pointing back to the domain that you're trying to get a link from, what does that PQ look like? What's their citation flow? What's their trust flow? And what's the age of the domain? And was it dropped? Is it part of the PBN? Or, there's so many other factors that fold into making this link and this acquisition meaningful beyond just the DA. You've got to look beyond that. Okay, let's get into our third. All right, third question. It's content, right? For so long, everybody's very, very much aware that content is critical. It is critical. Content in so many different forms, but let's just start this looking at the lens of let's say blog articles, things of this nature. Oftentimes potential clients, they ask me, okay, we understand we need content. We want to be able to serve Google. We want to support our overarching keyword ecosystem. How many blog articles should we write a week, a month? How many, and what's the cadence, right? So that is a good question, because at least what we're really talking about is we understand the value of content, and we know that it's needed to truly support us in our endeavors and the infrastructure of our keyword ecosystem. But the right question beyond it, how many, is what are the quality metrics that we should be serving and we should be catering to and meeting within our content in order for it to actually perform for us? Not just should we all know we should, not just how often, how many, but deeper than that today. I have seen and stewarded our clients to outperform in so many ways, again, here, based upon this qualitative segmentation, not quantitative. I'd rather see two articles. I'd rather see one article a month that was very, very high quality, and we can talk about what that looks like in a moment, than 5 articles or one every week or 2 a week that are short and not really offering any depth or value. And the other component to this too is what are they supporting? In other words, what we don't want to do is build cannibalization. Next thing you know, you're creating content for the sake of creating content, but you're competing against yourself for the same keywords, and there's no methodical nature to all of this. So it really isn't so much how many, it's how good can they be, and what are we trying to hit? What kind of metrics are we really trying to hit within the content piece itself so that it performs? Don't want a tangent, although I do have a sense that this analogy I'm about to say is a little bit more spot on than the last, which is that there's this idea of if a tree falls over in the wood, in the woods, but no one's around to hear it, did it make a sound? If you write content and nobody sees it because it ends up in the dark corners of the internet, even if it was a great thought, there was some nugget really shared that's of value, how great was it if nobody sees it, right? So what we have to think about is how to make the piece really perform. And that is not about quantity, it is about quality.
Okay, so as you're talking, and before we started recording, you had said something to the effect of that you spend most of your time in technical SEO. And maybe it's good right here to kind of separate out saying this is technical SEO, this is non-technical SEO, and these are the different elements to SEO. And then we'll get into, if you could get into explain what do you really mean by you spend most of your time in the technical?
Well, yeah. So with SEO, I mean, just like with anything, there is a large segment of analytical analysis to it all. We can get paralysis by analysis where we are watching the keywords so closely that I'm speaking as an industry as a whole and companies as a whole. We can be less tactical because we're more caught in the ebbs and flows of the analytics. Our team watches the analytics carefully too, but we're very, very strategic and technical. And when you have that, after that strategy comes the tactical implementation. So the technical side can be somewhat bifurcated, meaning it could be a bit server side, making sure that the website performance is optimal and its page speed and the core web vitals, and that, the site itself is responsive and serving mobile. And so that's a segment of the technical. And it can also be on-page technical. Now, on-page technical really means beyond the site structure, the navigation structure, the way in which we're communicating and feeding the data to Google so that it can be indexed in SERP. Beyond that, on the page itself, what's really happening with the way in which we're communicating to Google? Enhancing or massaging kind of your H1s or your H2 through H6 tags. These are indicators to Google about what's most important on the page. Often when there's content in the format of, let's say, imagery or even videos, that's fantastic to have from an engagement perspective. But what are we doing to serve the alt data therein? So the technical kind of takes the assets that live and the verbiage that breathes and helps weave together so that from the front-facing segmentation is great for consumers or core demographics, the people that you're reaching. And from the back end, the SERPs, the crawlers, they understand and get just as much, if not more value out of it as well.
Well, as you're talking, going back to that, what I have an understanding of in regards to SEO, the thought is, oh, well, I have a person who's creating all of our content. But what I have found is that a lot of those people who are skilled at creating copy and content don't even take into consideration some of the things that you were just mentioning.
Yeah, and this is just my opinion, but in my opinion, nor should they. And why I say that is I have worked with writers now, honestly, for I hate to date myself, but I don't know, maybe 15 years. I've worked very closely with writers. I've learned a lot over the years. And what I've learned is that, writers, I don't like to sandbox them too robustly. In other words, I want them they have a passion too, where my passion is SEO. Their passion is to a degree, storytelling, right? It is content development. It is writing. And sometimes I feel like if you give them too tight SEO parameters in the beginning and say, now write about this, but with these tight parameters, it really can, inhibit their creativity, and ultimately the piece itself maybe doesn't come off as good as it could. So what I love to do is have a topic for them, right, that we're suggesting, and they can always be part of that ideation. But when we have the topic, maybe a keyword or at least some semantic lens around what are we trying to support, and let them do their magic. Let them write. After it's written, that's usually when it comes back to me and my team. And at that point, we can then start to massage it and make sure that from an SEO segmentation, it's good. We can lay it into the CMS and start to build out those technical components. And now we've served both sides of the fence.
Talking about serving both sides of the fence, right now there's and has been, but even probably now more in the spotlight more than ever because of the importance of organic search rankings and how we need to be able to stand out, especially in B2B, is that there's a lot of artificial intelligence tools to help us to create content. And if I start thinking about those tools that currently exist and augmenting and assisting and supporting, that creative writing effort, how much are they actually taking into consideration all those technical aspects you were talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. There is a bevy of new tools that are harnessing AI to help with the content production. I think that is very much in a state of evolution right now. In other words, some are working better than others. And what I've seen so far is that the tools that are generating content so that it's unique aren't really taking an SEO. And the tools that are taking an SEO are really spinning it up for SEO. As opposed to maybe depth and engagement and other things for the reader. From my perspective, it still is a manual process to hit both those marks cleanly. There could be a new SaaS solution out there that I'm not aware of. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist in the industry. It may, but I don't know of it yet, and I haven't seen it yet. So what I have seen though work really well is utilizing those AI tools to develop kind of that core foundational copy, but I still see the human component then in an editorial capacity and then usually passed off to an SEO for a final kind of review and implementation for it to really be the best. Again, this is a do it once, do it right. This is a kind of a let's put up content that really resonates, has a chance for virality because there is deep metrics of quality baked into it. This isn't a let's just what I fear happens so often in content in SEO is we're ticking boxes. Yeah. We built some links. Oh, sure. We put up some blog posts and we're ticking boxes. What we really want to do is do it not for the sake of doing it, but do it because we know ultimately it will build mileage and traction for us for the long term down the road. It's quality, something we can all be proud of.
Well, so as you're saying that, I almost tend to start thinking that I need, two different types of levels of expertise as far as my editing is concerned. I need to have a content editor and then I need to have an SEO editor. Is that correct?
Yes. So for the clients that I work with, for everybody that I've worked with in the last, let's just call it decade, and today, everything that's happening today, what I'm seeing happen is either A, the company has such good writers. I have a couple of good writers that are so good that frankly, rarely does it ever need editing. By the time the piece is written from a grammatical perspective and from a readability perspective and from a quality perspective, engagement perspective, it's spot on. And so now it just needs to go in the hands of SEOs to make sure that it's indexed in just the same level of quality as it would be from a readability perspective. If you have that, great. If you don't have that, rather what you have is, some writers who are pretty good. There may be some spelling mistakes here and there, or maybe they didn't link to certain sources, or, maybe some of the structure wasn't built out, ideally perfectly, or maybe it's good, but it can use a proofread. Then sure, I often have some of my clients will come to me. Here's our content. Please proofread it, edit it. Once that's done, SEO it. Once that's done, get it into the CMS, ready for publication, and schedule the publication. So it can be a conveyor belt system. It just depends upon the level of quality of the team and the writer.
Okay, so that I mean, gosh, as you're saying this, it used to be, especially in B2B, that oftentimes doing just a little bit better would enable you to get some of those first page rankings. But it seems to me as you're talking and going through this, I'm like, I think those days are over. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, you know what it is it's to be a little bit better does get you those rankings, but you have to be a little bit better in a multitude of spaces now, not just in one. So you have to be a little bit better in your page speed insights, like the actual speed of the site, the way that it renders both desktop and mobile, have to be a little bit better. You have to have a little bit better health score from a technical side for the website itself. You have to have a little bit better content and engagement metrics. You have to have a little bit better domain authority. If you're a little bit better in that ecosystem of those components, that's what it takes. You don't necessarily have to be dramatically better, but the competition is always increasing. So you always have to do, you always want to set the bar a little bit higher to stay ahead of the competition and just to know that you're in compliance algorithmically, because Google's always changing their algos. So you have to look ahead and just be, in stride with that and a little bit better in a variety of capacities.
Okay, so you hear all these stories about the Google algorithm. And how many actual elements are part of that, ranking equation. And, I've heard some people say, 200 plus. And I've also heard some people say, yeah, but it's really only the top 5 that you need to focus in on. And if you hit those, it's highly likely you'll be in that, 1% or, let's just say a few percentage points above everyone else. And then you make sure all of those other elements in place. And that's all you really need to do. You don't need to overkill it. How true is that?
Well, I think the notion that there's 5 or even 10 or 15 algos that need to be in compliance is a broad stroke. And all I mean by that is it's just a bigger bucket. It's easy to say, look, as long as your technicals are in check, that's a huge segment of the algorithm. That's true. That's one bucket. That's 1 of 5 right there. But if you unpack that bucket, in order for those technicals to be in check, there's a lot of work to do. The way I would say it, though, is, there's some industry standard tools, SEMrush, Moz, these sorts of things. You can take a look at any website with those tools, and you will see thousands and sometimes many thousands of issues. There, though, I do concur. Meaning you don't have to remediate every single one of those issues. Websites can have hundreds of issues and they can still outrank and outperform. It depends kind of what are those issues really looking like. And so I kind of affix a weight to them as if it were scales. Some have more weight than others. So I guess that's what I'm really trying to say is, to your point, I think some have more weight than others, but I think they kind of all need to be thought about in some capacity.
Well, when I start thinking of all those different areas of domain expertise that are required, when I start thinking, and you mentioned several different things. If I'm doing this, my likelihood of success is going to increase. I'm sitting here and I'm a digital marketer, and I know that the pressure has gotten significantly greater because the sales team has lost some of their, possible channels and opportunities. And they're looking at the web folks and saying, I need sales and revenue. And yet from a marketing side, a lot of times their mind's in the brand space. It's very, very different, and you talked about some of these core vitals and, things like that. It's no longer about, quite frankly, I should say it or ask it in this way. Does that top page ranking, can it correlate and equate to more revenue?
Yeah. I guess this is just my day of analogies. I don't know why, but maybe I need more coffee. I don't know. But here's the thing. I don't like what I'm about to say personally. Like it doesn't always roll off my tongue nicely, but it hits a very clean point, which is that they say the best place to hide a dead body is on page 2 of Google. So in other words, page 2 is where the action is. And so page 1 is where the action is. So there's no doubt that by being on page 1 within Google, having those core rankings, that is going to drive traffic. And if you have the right rankings for the right queries, that's going to drive leads. When you look at Google and you perform a query, there's always many thousands, hundreds of thousands, often millions sometimes of results. When somebody performs a query and they see you in the top 2, 3, 4, even maybe number 1, number 5, right in that core, they think to themselves, gosh, you bubbled up over 1 million people or over hundreds of thousands of search results. Like Google trusts you. That trust imparts and starts to build some authority just in its own. And so I think if you look at the volume, you can definitively see These search terms have people typing it in every day. People are looking they're searching for usually what companies are solving for. So yes, being in that narrative, in that journey is going to be vastly impactful. The only caveat I want to throw into this is this. I work with a lot of companies that are in the B2B space. And what I'm finding is this. They're adopting organic search, meaning before what was happening was organic search was kind of almost like a voodoo, like, it was behind a curtain and it was smoke and mirrors and nobody really knew. Businesses didn't want to get involved in that. But today, Google's being more transparent exactly about what it is that they require for you to be in compliance. They're pulling the curtain back. Now that we know more, we can predict more and we can more methodically and accurately hit those goals with regards to ranking and impression share. Now that that's happening, businesses are adopting organic search. And to your point with COVID, and we aren't in big sales meetings or at conventions as often, people are folding into the digital space to convene and to find solutions. It definitively presents opportunity.
Well, we need results fast, man. But all the things that you laid out, I'm sorry, that does not equate. What am I really looking at here if I'm saying, well, I'm a page 2, heck, I'm a page 5, page 10, organization.
Yeah.
Well, what's it going to take for me to actually get to page 1?
It's going to take synergy and concert. And what I mean by that is it's not going deep in any one space, but rather going into each of the spaces and having them come together synergistically and in concert. So when everything folds together in harmony, that's when there's propulsion. So in other words, if you raise your domain authority, but the website itself is technically not sound, you're working against yourself. If the site is technically sound, you put a lot of time into that, but your domain authority is faltering and it's just low. There's not a lot of trust coming through to you. It's going to hinder you. It's when everything works together in concert. And here's the thing. Yeah, it can take time. Depending on where you're at, it could take time. So in other words, like you said, you could be page 5 and 10 or 20, it could take time, but, once you make it to the front page, once you garner, it doesn't even have to be the front, like the top. Once you start getting the impression share, once some of the keywords that you rank for start to bubble up and get that impression share, it begins to serve. But the difference is this. I have nothing against paid search. I love it. The paid opportunities, LinkedIn and different opportunities, those work really, really well. But I see those as the sprint and SEO as the marathon. And with paid segmentations, and we're thinking fast leads, okay. But when your budget is exhausted, you go dark. And with organic search, you live on and the visibility is continual. So the idea is if for people who are looking for immediate results, harness paid segmentations for immediate visibility, but be working on the backside to enhance your organic search so it can start to replace some of those in due course. Well, a lot to unpack there, Jon Lightfoot. I'll tell you. How does the B2B DM gang get in touch with you? Yes. Well, I think the easiest way is just to visit strategicseosolutions.com. That's our website. You can find us there, reach out to us there. We're always happy to jump on a call or, to discuss and just, have an open, candid conversation about where they're at, but definitely looking forward to chatting with the gang. Jon Lightfoot, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best. You as well. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.